All right, Allysha. So the red light's on. So why don't we do a quick sound check? And I'll ask my famous question here about what did you have for breakfast this morning?
I always have the same thing. I had a glass of water with half a lemon squeezed into it to kickstart metabolism.
Right.
And then I have a scrumptious latte. I
Uh-oh.
used to be a barista, and so I have a really fancy coffee set up. And
Ooh.
I always make myself something decadent.
Wow, very, very nice. That's fancy. It's I didn't have anything today. I was bebopping and scatting. I had to get out today, so yeah.
I almost never have food, but always the latte.
Okay, very nice, very cool. So you spent some time as a barista. Is that what you're saying?
I did, yeah.
Okay, very cool. So you could make all the fancy stuff. Can you make like the
Oh, absolutely.
designs?
It will probably, I love what I do now, but barista will always be in the running for all-time favorite job. It's just an amazing thing to do.
Okay. All right. That's good to know. Cool. I think we're sounding good. We can probably pivot and move on to why we're actually talking. So, so why don't you tell my listeners about what you just raised money for over on Kickstarter?
Oh, well, I have spent the last 6 years researching and writing my debut novel, The Heretic. About 6.5, 7 years ago, I was traveling across France with my grandmother. And we went up to the little mysterious village of Rennes-le-Château in the south of France. And you might know it from the Da Vinci Code and, a lot of other famous conspiracy theories and things like that. And we hired to show us around the foremost expert, English-speaking expert, I have to say, Henry Lincoln. And this is the man who co-wrote Holy Blood, Holy Grail in 1982, international bestseller. And he showed us this presentation, and he took us around and pointed out these codes that had been hidden in the church. And I was blown away.
Yeah.
My jaw was dropped the whole time. I'm following along. I'm on the edge of my seat. And at some point I must have turned to him and said, but you realize this should change the way that we see everything. And he just looks at me and says, yes. And when the day was finished and we were loading back into the car, he pulled me aside and he put his hand very dramatically on my shoulder and he said, Il faut que tu reviennes. J'ai besoin de toi. You must come back. I need you.
Wow.
I said, well, I'm dropping my grandma at the airport on Monday, so I can be back Tuesday. And that began an adventure where he was looking for somebody to pass along his decades of research, somebody who could carry on the legacy, and somebody who could bring the real story to the modern world.
Right.
And so The Heretic, long story long, The Heretic is a novel that puts all of those pieces back into place. It jumps back into history and gives the cultures that we're dealing with this ancient secret. It follows the journey of a modern woman who is dealing with the dilemmas that we deal with every day and kind of has to put these pieces into place and figure out what they mean for her life.
Wow. That's a lot. So yeah, I'm blown away on that. So outside of that, was there an idea prior to that though of writing a book, or or is that something that you had in as a thought, like as a dream, and then you just kind of fell on this, or like were you searching out to some degree to write something about what you were just talking about?
That's a great question. So I've been writing for as long as I can remember. Before this project, you could usually find me at a coffee shop with a notebook. And the most common question I ever got is, what are you writing? What do you write? What have you published? And I would always kind of chuckle at that because my answer was always the same. I'm a writer, so I write.
Right.
One day there will be a story that needs telling and I'm going to be ready.
Sure. Right. Interesting. So it's just something that's just kind of been just in you. You create that way, huh? Yeah.
Rilke said in his letters to a young poet, ask yourself if you must write. And if you must, then just give yourself to it totally. So I was well and truly in that camp before ever there was a story that needed telling.
Right. Talk a little bit about this partnership in terms of like, how does that work in in terms of a book? Like, is it more just inspiration? I mean, like that relationship with Henry, right? Henry Lincoln. You were
Henry
mentioning, right?
Lincoln, yeah.
Yeah. Like, how does a relationship like that work together in a book? Is it just, I have no idea. I've never wrote a book, so
That's
yeah,
wonderful.
yeah. So how does that kind of work?
So he's just really been my mentor throughout this process. When I first started, the idea kind of came up over coffee. I was reading a little novel that had something to do with the mysteries of the region, and he said in passing, what did you think? And I said, as a joke, it was okay. I could do better. And oh my goodness, if he didn't lean forward, look at me and say, so do it. About 5 minutes later, he said, what are you still doing here? You're busy. I said, okay, you have a book to write. So I ran down the hill to my little apartment in the backwoods of France. And that afternoon, well, by that evening, I had 50 pages. And
Wow.
I sent them along to him, and he said, you're doing it, keep going. And that turned into 3 weeks of me hardly looking up from the page. And
Wow.
that turned into 5 years of editing and rewriting and learning how to do justice to this story and
Sure.
learning how to really craft a novel
Right.
in not just a compelling way for a modern audience, but in a way that is really true to these histories.
Gotcha. So where does this sort of land in terms of fiction, nonfiction? I mean, where does it kind of land because of the story and stuff?
It's a bit of a mix, which is always tricky in publishing. So
Right.
the genre is actually visionary fiction. And visionary fiction is an up and coming, but still little known genre. With books like The Celestine Prophecies, Jonathan Living Seagull, The Mists of Avalon. These are books that actually allow you to embark on your own journey. And so there's a spiritual component. There's usually ancient wisdoms and lessons. Probably the most famous is The Alchemist. And we can all sort of go on that journey, even though a story is being told about someone else. And so that's really where the Heretic falls. But there are elements of historical fiction. There are elements of magical realism. There are elements of thriller, although it's not a true thriller. Because of that spiritual journey, this is a book you're going to pick up and set down in the same way that you might do that with your favorite nonfiction spiritual book or self-help type thing.
Right.
You're going to stop and integrate in between some of the major shifts.
Sure. Interesting. Let's go back a little bit to that 5-year period of you kind of crafting and putting this together. What is, kind of walk us through, like, what is a typical day? Is it always creating? Is it editing? Is it finding people to help edit? Is it research? Like, what is a process, day to day in something like this? It feels like a huge undertaking,
It is. I kind of go through phases. So phase one is living the story. And that is what we call research. But when you're looking at something like this, where you do have historical information, but we're also wondering, how does this apply to us? Why should we care?
Right.
And so this isn't a story where I'm just reading things in books. I'm visiting places. I'm touching the old stones of the sites that I'm talking about. I'm sitting there for long periods of time. And most of the segments of the book that are about certain places are actually written in that place. So you can really get a feel for the place itself. I love the living it phase. It's easy as a writer to feel guilty because there's not a ton of writing that's happening during that phase. You're really out running around. It looks like playing, and reading tons of interesting things. And then that transitions really quickly into writing. And what that means is one day I wake up and I can't not write.
Right.
And this is something that I've had to put systems in place in my life, because I will forget to eat. I will forget to sleep. I have no sense of whether it's day or night or who's calling or anything that's happening outside of me, the page, and my cup of coffee. That's really my favorite part of the whole thing. because it's when I get to go on the adventure. You know,
Right.
for the reader, they're going to enter into the adventure when they're reading the book. For me, that happens when I'm writing it. You know, if I'm writing something terrible, I'm sobbing. If I'm writing something wondrous, I'm elated. You know.
Right. That's it's something. I mean, I used to be in the well, I still am in a little bit in the creative space. I would do that in the songwriting world. I used to write songs,
Yeah.
and you would just
I
I would
think
just
any artist can relate.
yeah, you just disappear and lose yourself, and you're like, oh my gosh, I've been the same clothes for 3 days. I didn't know. I wrote 3 songs, whatever it is. So kind of going into this type of journey, what are you looking at in terms of like kind of starting to think about expenses and how to sort of where will this go? Where will I find the money? Where will the audience be? Again, 5 years is a long time. So like, what are some of the thoughts around just like the business side of what you're working on here?
Yeah, where to go with this for publishing was a really big question. And I think that so much of an author's career is determined by what publishing model you choose.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, I knew that I needed to maintain some controls on the book. Since this information has always been passed down in code, there are actually codes that are in the book.
Hmm.
And so I needed a publishing model where the publisher wasn't going to push back constantly and try to change little things. You know, the things here are done intentionally and for a reason. So I ended up choosing a hybrid publishing model. And what that means is that they essentially bring their expertise and we partner.
Hmm.
And as a result, I am the one who brings the funding, but I have all the resources of a publisher with major distributors.
Hmm.
I'm not thinking about how am I going to get into Barnes and Noble.
Right.
Last week, I just showed up in Barnes and Noble. It was wonderful.
Right. Yeah. It's great.
That said, the funding is tricky because this has been all consuming.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was a really big question of the printing costs, the graphic design costs, all of those need to come up front in order to make the book. And it's really all on me at that point.
Right.
You know, had I gone with a major publisher, they would have covered all of that. But I would not have been guaranteed that everything goes in as Henry Lincoln and I feel it needs to. So.
Right. And in this type of industry right now, because correct me if I'm wrong, this is the first novel, correct, that you worked on?
Yes.
Published, right? So like, do you have different, were people maybe not as trusting of you to like deliver, or was there anything like any of those types of conversations, the traditional route? So, Kickstarter starts to become a potential vehicle. Was anything like that happening?
Yeah, there are a few reasons to do Kickstarter. Because I've been working on this book for the last 5 years, and because of my relationship with Henry Lincoln, there's some credibility there. You know, I've been talking to everyone says, "What do you do?" And I say, "Well, I've kind of got this crazy job. I'm writing this book about this ancient secret." And so everyone I've met at a party for the last 5 years is going, "Wait, what?" They're on the edge of their seat waiting. But at the same time, because it's my first novel, you don't necessarily know if I'm a good writer.
Right.
Now, we've taken several different routes in terms of, I released the prologue just so you can see I can scrap a sentence together. But at the end of the day, there's an element of faith. And so Kickstarter seemed like a really good match in that way, because it is, on the one hand, faith-based. You're talking about projects that haven't been out before, new ideas. And the other reason that Kickstarter was a really good match is that as a new writer, I really, really need to get the word out.
Yeah.
And Kickstarter affords us an amount of social proof. We've just raised almost $40,000. And so when somebody says, "Hey, yeah, you've written a novel," okay, a lot of people have written books. They keep them in their drawers, or they self-publish. Not any disparaging about like self-publishing, but you can really get anything published in today's market that doesn't necessarily make it a good book. And so the Kickstarter helped show that, yes, people are interested in this. Yes, there's some value there.
Yeah. Well, I think this is a good jumping off point to just kind of focus a little bit more on the Kickstarter. So what was some of the pre-launch strategy? How were you getting the word out that I mean, obviously you were working on it, but how did you start to get a public or an actual crowd, around what you were working on before you hit the launch button?
That's great. So our pre-launch campaign was long only because people knew that I was writing this book long before we ever went to Kickstarter.
Mm-hmm.
So I did have kind of a built-in fan base in my inner circle. I also do sacred mystery tours in the south of France with Henry Lincoln. So they're based all around these mysteries. So I did have a small mailing list of really interested people for that. So we kind of, during pre-launch, prepped all of these people, but what we really did was get a team behind this.
Mm-hmm.
So we didn't just tell our people about this, we got them on board to tell their people.
Right.
When you hear about something like this, an ancient secret in the south of France and mysteries and codes, it probably makes you think of someone in your life who's really into this. It's not everyone, but for some people, this is really important. For some people, this is a passion and a drive. And so what we were able to do was talk to people in an authentic way about how important this is to me, how important it is to Henry Lincoln, and really able to touch and move them in a way that they were bringing that out into their lives and getting people excited.
Sure. That's awesome. What was maybe the weirdest thing maybe in the dashboard of Kickstarter? Was like, was there a country that really supported you, or I don't know, just something that you maybe had no idea or had no expectations on, and you were kind of like, wow, we had a huge support in Mexico. I don't know, just whatever it might be. Was there anything like that?
Our following was really spread across the world. It wasn't terribly surprising only because these subjects are really international. So my Sacred Mystery Tours mailing list is already hitting people from, India and Germany, Italy. We've got people everywhere. The confines of this was a little bit that it's in English right now. So when we get to foreign rights, more people will be jumping in.
Right.
But I think I just got an email this morning saying I couldn't order it in Denmark. That's after the Kickstarter. Now we're on Amazon, but but what was surprising to me was the way that people pledged. So I had talked to personally and reached out to hundreds of people. I expected a certain percentage of them, hopefully, to buy a book.
Right.
But they didn't just buy a book. They bought 2 books, or they went in at 150 for the autographed copy, or they got the fantasy style Lord of the Rings 2-scale map of the region that our visionary artist did. They really were scaling up to such a degree that I was blown away, even to, all the way to our biggest reward was our Ancient Mystery Quest by Sacred Mystery Tours. And some people who I never would have expected in a million years jumped on and are coming on the tour this year.
Yeah, that's great.
So it created some real, I think, shifts in how people normally operate.
Well, let's walk through a little bit of that. Books can be a pretty challenging thing to fundraise on Kickstarter, which is why I was excited to have this conversation, because you just don't see a ton of them, or they're funded at like $3,000. Again, nothing wrong, but just, the scale of this is actually, I think, pretty large in the publishing world on Kickstarter. But walk us through a little bit of how you were kind of thinking about those rewards, because I think that's when I look at your campaign, I think that's where the success truly was that the rewards allowed people to grow, right? They allowed to be more than just a book. So how did you kind of stand back and not go too cheesy with something, or say like, oh, they'll buy my baseball hat, type of thing. But how did you kind of lay out those rewards so that people had an opportunity to go deeper into the story, deeper into the book, get closer to it to a degree? How did you kind of walk through those steps when you were putting that together?
That's great. So we actually did have some help on this. Sal Brigman ended up advising on the final rewards. And so that made a difference in honing it. What I did is I saw this coming a long way out. And so for maybe a year, I just started making a list of assets. Okay, these are all of the different things that we could offer. And my focus was really, I wanted to offer value to people. I didn't want to kind of trick them into giving me money in any way. I wanted to give something that was going to be meaningful and that was going to enrich their experience of the book, to help them more fully enter the story. And so we had lots of different kinds of things on there. At one point, there were bonus chapters. We did have some idea for tote bags and T-shirts and things like that. But in the end, we decided that the most valuable were going to be the things that were really intricately related to the book. And where Sal helped us out a lot was in hitting those price marks. And I think that really, that structure made all the difference, because giving somebody something that's, in the low range, that's the ebook, but then we're throwing in a coded bookmark that you can only get on Kickstarter, and a few other things that are really making it kind of special, so even if you're just getting an ebook in the email, you're going to get a PDF page of the coloring book, and you're going to get a little note in the mail with your coded bookmark from me. So you're getting two separate reward packages that are kind of coming in, and every reward structure was set up like that. And the prices helped a lot, so just making it really clear, having clear jumps between the tiers, and then having that really high price mark was what ended up setting us over the edge as well. That Ancient Mystery Quest was up there for about 4,000. So
yeah, it was great. I mean, it was structured perfectly. That's I was interested to hear how you got to that point. So it was you definitely got some great advice on that. What so what starts to happen now that funding's coming in? I know you mentioned just Amazon a second ago, but like what starts to happen kind of behind the scenes in terms of printing, shipping, getting the backers or stuff? Just what's happening like today right now for you?
Yeah. Today I am actually prepping to go to Oregon. I'm in Canada at the moment, and we'll be heading out to where my publisher is based for a crazy season of launch and publication and getting everything ready. So basically we had the Kickstarter, and we were already set to publish before we did the Kickstarter. The difference was sort of whether I need to take a second mortgage. So we're in line for a June 1st publication.
Okay.
And so before you officially publish, usually do a pre-launch. So what we just had was a major pre-launch party. It looked a lot like kind of the first and the last days of the Kickstarter, but with Amazon.
Yep.
And so it was great. We got to see the Heretic soar to the #1 new release in historical religious fiction.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
And so now that we're launched and set up on Amazon, we will kind of continue to spread the word, and I will be heading out west. Right now, the graphic designer is putting the final layout into place. That's going to come back to me for a kind of final read through and okay.
Right.
And then it will go to the printer. That takes them about 5 or 6 weeks to really produce the book.
Right.
So we're expecting the book to be ready to go sometime in May. Mm-hmm. And I was able to I made some calls and was able to work out a special deal to get the book shipped directly from the printer to our Kickstarter individuals. So nice. They're all actually going to have it before I do.
Oh, nice. That's good though. You got to take care of the backers,
Right?
Yeah. That's awesome. Well, how about maybe what does like the next 5 years look like for you? I mean, is it another book like this? Is it a sequel to it? Is there more to unpack? What does it look like down the road here?
This is definitely the first step in what I hope is a full-time career. I got about halfway, 3/4 of the way through the Heretic and realized I can't fit everything in this book.
Right.
So it is the first in a trilogy.
Okay.
I am already working on the second book behind the scenes. I've got the first 50 pages is written. The rest is in process.
Yeah.
I'm sure I will one day just sit down and not be able to get up from the page, and the whole thing will kind of blurb out, and then I'll go into the editing of it. The trilogy really is bringing to light the different discoveries that are being made right now, but also the application for our life. And I think it could have huge kind of, it's a way of looking at things that speaks deeply to how our political system runs, how we're treating the ecological crisis that we're in, and how we deal with basic things like depression and psychological dilemmas and the things that are really prevalent today. So that is on the books. I also have what is beginning to be rather a backlog of things to write. Some years ago, I worked with a Vietnam vet who was a corpsman deep in the war, and he came home and really struggled with PTSD, and through the whole thing was a musician, and he has this incredible story of how the Vietnam vets were treated when they got back, of being a medic deep in the jungle, of coming back and recovering from that. And so he's just turned 70, and wow. I am going to be very shortly looking into helping him turn that into something that people can really dive into and relate to.
That's awesome, man. That sounds like a good one too. So, well, awesome. Well, where can people kind of dive into your world, find out more, learn about you, follow you? Where can people go?
Yay, this is great. So AllyshaLavino.com. My name's a little tricky to spell, but
I'll put it in the, I'll spell it correctly.
Get that in the
notes. Yep.
Right. That's a great way to join the community. So we are in the process of really creating a community of heretics around the world. And heretic, this word, does not mean what people think it means. You know, it has been used to talk about people who, you know, have believed any number of things. But what heretic really means, the etymology comes from ancient Greek, and it means able to choose. And so historically what happened is the Catholic Church didn't want people to choose. They were telling you what you were to believe. They were telling you the way that it was. If you were choosing anything at all, it was wrong.
Right.
And so in this day and age, this is a really, really important concept to bring back. It's not about vilifying people who do this or that. It's that each of us has the ability, the right, and the freedom to choose for ourselves what kind of person we want to be, what kind of life we want to lead, you know, how we want to engage with the world. Wow. So AllyshaLavino.com to join the heretics. Jump on my mailing list, or check out the Sacred Mystery Tours in the south of France. I'm also on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, Allysha Lavino. And I really love connecting with people. You know, I don't know if someday I'll get to be so big that I have people on this, but right now, you know, you send me an email and I answer it. You know, it's one of the great joys is just really connecting with people individually and learning about what they care about, you know, because I'm just one little person over here, but I'm writing about some really big stuff. And so it's great to hear where people are coming from and to make those connections.
That's awesome. Well, we're a fan over here. Loved your campaign. I thought you guys did a really great job on it. Looks like super, super successful. And we're following from Detroit here. So keep up the good work. Keep writing. And we all over here look forward to seeing all the stuff that you put out. So thanks so much for taking time out of your day.
Well, thanks for having me, Jeff. That's great.
Awesome. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.